is a DrumWise Meets, and today I'm here with Nick Buda, who's recorded and played with the likes of Taylor Swift, Dolly Parton, and Lionel Richie. Hi, Nick.
Hi there.
What age did you start playing, and what music inspired you to start playing, or when you started playing?
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if there was a particular age. I was always interested in drums. And I think I'm actually originally from South Africa, and we moved to the States when I was just before I turned 13. So around probably 12 or 11 or 12, I think I took my first lesson in South Africa. But then we moved, and then that transition. So I had practice pads in my room probably from the age of 13 or so, where I would just play along with essentially just rubber pads, because we were in an apartment at that point, to music that I loved. And that music was pretty diverse because my parents raised me on anything from James Taylor, of which I'm still an absolute huge fan of, to Loggins and Messina, and all the sort of stuff that my folks were into, which was Eagles, all that stuff. And then I got into, obviously as a kid, a lot of the heavier rock stuff. I was into Van Halen. I was into Toto. I got into, a whole range. So I would be practicing from anything from, James Taylor to Metallica. I was into the whole range, and my whole process was just to try and copy as close as I could whatever those drummers were doing, and then that sort of formed the stuff that I like.
Good stuff. And what was your first drum set?
So the first kit I really had, because I had those practice pads at first, literally it was a snare drum pad and two kind of tom pads, which were also cymbal pads, because they're just rubber pads, right? Yeah. And a hi-hat pad and a kick drum. I had that for the first almost maybe 6 to 9 months of my playing, and I played those freaking 6 hours a day. I mean, I was obsessed with playing drums. And then maybe 6 months after I had those, since we were still in an apartment, my folks got me an electronic kit, because I couldn't have live drums in this apartment. And it was those Pearl electronic kits that they had for a little while, with a really, the brain, you could like manipulate any part of the sound, the waveform, whatnot. And the pads were big, clunky plastic pads with nothing like the Roland stuff or whatever that you get now. But anyway, I had those for probably a year in this apartment before I got my first acoustic kit, which was actually a Pearl Custom Z kit, which was the really heavy bird's eye maple shells, because the drum store Forks, which I used to shop at as a kid, and Gary Forkham and I are still good friends. I was looking for a big double bass drum, Premier kit or something like that. And Gary was like, listen, I've got this kit, came in from an endorsee, a Pearl guy. I'm not even sure who it was. The price, you can't, these are high-end drums that you're not going to be able to beat price-wise. I can give them to you for essentially the same price as the lower-end Premier kit or whatever. Trust me, buy these drums. And I did. And although they weighed a ton to get around from, because they were like, I can't remember the ply, but they were up there as far as thick. They were like the last iteration of the really thick shell drums before thin shells became really popular. Yeah. And so, and I had those drums for, 15 years or more before I sold them through Gary. Again, he helped me find a buyer for them, even more than that. I don't know how many years later, but yeah, there you go.
Awesome. So I was going to say, do you still have it? But it's out there somewhere.
It's out there. There was a point that, they just didn't sound good to me anymore. And I'm sure that it was, maybe if I heard them again today, I'd love them again. But I got to a point probably in my 30s somewhere where like I said, they were freaking a beast to lug around. And then I also wasn't crazy about the sound. I think we we all got so used to the tone that comes out of thinner shell drums that I don't know, maybe that was just where I was. And I just, I was like, why am I keeping this kit that I've never used? It's sitting in cases. And there was a market for them because they were so, well, not so rare, but there weren't that many of them made back in the day, because I think Pearl hit that market right as the tastes changed. And so there weren't that many of those kits around,
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
And while we're talking about equipment, what's your current equipment of choice?
Well, I've obviously got more than I need. That's for sure. I am really fortunate in that I was never huge in making sure that I was endorsed by whoever. I just sort of fell into deals based upon what I was into. And Noble and Cooley is a company that I always loved their snare drums and didn't really know too much about them. And they actually came to me as a, would you be interested in doing either just a snare drum deal or a full kit deal? And I was like, well, let me check out some kit stuff. Because obviously the name is, synonymous with you handcrafted, great, high-end drums. And it just blew me away. And the fact that they were willing to, not just willing, but came to me to do this thing, I was like, I would love to do it. And so for, I don't know, 4 or so years now, maybe a little more than that, I've been officially a Noble and Cooley guy, and I love the stuff that I have from them. But I love all kinds of drums. I love Gretsch drums too, and I have actually the kit that's sitting here in my little. I had to move. I was sharing a bigger studio with a friend of mine since the last iteration of my studio, the Loft, was sold with the house that we sold. So then I moved in a shared studio with a friend of mine. Pandemic hit. Now I'm in a much smaller room for the moment, which actually, as it so happens, side note, freaking sounds incredible.
Yeah.
I was so impressed with how this small room is like punchy and like I can't even say enough about it. But anyway, the kit. Let's see here. I don't want to cover the thing that I have in here is a 58. Sorry, Gretsch. Broadcaster. And which is great. I mean, it's a great sounding kit, and there's nothing against Noble and Cooley here. There's just certain drums that are, and the cool thing about them is they're like, we get it. You're a drummer. There's if I was purely just a kiss ass, then maybe it would just be Noble and Cooley. But so I've got I think 3 different Gretsch kits, and then the Noble and Cooley stuff. And as far as cymbals, I've been a Sabian guy for a long time. I love, obviously I've had some old Zildjians and all that sort of stuff, but Sabian's been so amazing, and I couldn't endorse a company I didn't love because how would I, how could I bullshit my way around talking about that?
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Yeah, exactly.
So Sabian's been amazing, and the cymbals are always freaking incredible. I've been an Evans guy forever too, and again, used Evans very many years before I was an endorsee with them, and same with Vader drumsticks. I've been with them for a long time too, and played them way longer than I've been with them. So I'm fortunate to have the companies that I've loved before I was with them actually get behind me. So
yeah, and that's a whole other conversation right there. What the endorsements conversation. Yeah, totally. I'm all for like using the stuff that you love, and people very much seem to get endorsements the wrong way around these days.
They do. Well, they try and like, how can I get free stuff?
Yeah.
And it's, well, what's the point of the free stuff if it's not what you would choose to use anyway? I mean, I'm not in it for the free stuff. I'm in it to play drums, and if I'm going to do that, I want them to be as comfortable and sound exactly like I want them to sound. And what does that equal? If those companies are going to be the same that are going to then get behind me, then I just won the jackpot, But other than that, you still, the bottom line is playing the stuff you love,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So some people have found this one a tough question. Others, they know the answer immediately. So here we go. I think it's quite a tough question, and I couldn't answer it. If you had to pick just one, could you tell us who your all-time favorite drummer is?
Steve Gadd.
Oh, easy answer.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot. You know, my top five revolves kind of a lot. But if you like the way that you asked it, is it comes down to that. If there's one, if it was all up into one thing, because I mean, listen, just over the last little while, somehow, the drumming community in Nashville is great, and I have a couple of drummer friends here that I'm very, very good friends with, and we get together for socially distanced coffees and whatnot, you know, and yap about stuff. And Vinny, the topic of Vinny came up again recently, and it was sort of undeniable. There is no other guy in our generation generally that is on the level that Vinny is at. He is insane in every genre, and that is very tough to find in any one drummer. You know, you could have a guy that's a great pocket guy and he's got some crazy chops, but put him in a sort of standard jazz setting, and you're gonna hear exactly where he's not fitting. You know, Vinny, put him anywhere, and it's like, Jesus, this guy's insane. But for me personally, Gad is just the most stylish. The parts he comes up with are so, it could seem so left of center on its own, and you hear it in the track, and you can't imagine another part fitting there. And yet, if you had to play that track without the drums on it, having never heard the track before, could you possibly come up with a part like that? I mean, it's hard to even imagine some of the stuff, you know, and I've been a huge fan of Gad's forever. The other thing about him, which is infuriating, is that, you know, I've studied his stuff in depth. And so I'll find myself on sessions and find something, there'll be something that'll bring a Gad type of thing to mind. And I'll think, oh man, this is great. Like, a quick example, some of the stuff he does on over the last couple of James Taylor records, he's obviously layered a few different parts, brushes, sticks, side stick on there, all kind of on top of each other. And it's so smooth. And when you, especially when you listen on headphones, it's so great. So I think occasionally a song will come up on a session. I think, man, I tell you what, let me, you know, and they always say, like, what do you think? You get brushes, sticks, what do you think? I was like, hey, listen, let me do a brush part down with the band, and then let me overdub a couple things. I've got some ideas. And these guys have never heard of, like, they've never thought about this kind of thing before, and I'm hearing Gad do it. So I do it, and they freak out, and they, oh man, this is so great. I would never have thought of doing this light sort of marchy snare thing underneath a brush track. Like, what the hell? And I listen to it, and I'm like, that bastard. Like, you can't ever make it sound that good. No matter what I try and do, Gad he is such a unique sound that you can identify it immediately, and there isn't another drummer that's ever going to make it sound just like that. And to me, that's that does it for me, you know. Plus the fact that he's just so freaking smooth. I mean, Jesus Christ, like his hands and all the stuff, and he's been like that ever since his, you know, when you watch early videos of him, it's been exactly the same thing, you know. I'm a huge fan.
Great answer. Good stuff.
Yeah.
So what's been the highlight of your career so far?
Wow. That's a tough question. You know, it's funny because the highlights are, you think, wow, this is amazing, until the next thing happens, and then that's amazing. You know, it's a little hard to say. You know, obviously the Taylor stuff was huge. And when it first took off, when we first went in to go make that Fearless record, it was the first time in my life, you know, I'd already gotten to play in front of huge amounts of people. I'd already done some cool things, and played with some of my absolute heroes too, which is something, you know, I mean, these are the things. Like, one of the highlights, I got to do a double drum thing with Richie Haywood years ago, and I was freaking 25 years old, and he's next to me. We're sharing the stage, playing this gig together. That's a highlight, you know. But going in to record this record with Taylor, she had already sold whatever, a couple million of the first record. She was now a huge success. And I had just started doing sessions. I mean, I'd been doing sessions a year, and Taylor came in as a new artist, and we were a new band, new producer, so everything was still new. So let's say by the second record, I'm maybe 3 years into doing sessions, still a baby in the big picture of sessions, you know. And now we're going in to record a record that we know is going to sell many millions of copies. Before we go into the studio, we know it's going to be huge because of what the first one was. That was a highlight. Recording that record was a highlight because, and not only that, but we did it with just the core guys that did the first record, the producer who plays, and me, and the bass player Tim, and the engineer Chad, and Taylor. And that was it. It wasn't like a big band. Like mostly in Nashville, you would record 6 or 7 pieces at one time, you know. This was just the core, and really getting to play. Like they really allowed us the edges, you know. We could really hit the stuff without it having to say so between the lines, you know. Yeah. So that was big, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like doing Jimmy Fallon with Dolly Parton was kind of cool too, you know.
Yeah.
Which incidentally was the first time I saw the Noble and Cooley kit that I have now was on that show, because they're up in Massachusetts. They made the kit for me and had it sitting on that stage when I showed up to do that. That was the first, anyway, yeah. Side story. But I mean, I've been fortunate, you know. I mean, there've been some really, really cool things. So it's really hard to answer. It's really hard to answer. And honestly, some highlights could even be just some of the bands I've gotten to play with and some of the amazing players here in town that you almost get so used to until you think about, like, holy shit, some of these guys have played on records for 30 plus years that I listened to before I even understood what session playing was all about, you know? So I've been, there's a lot of highlights.
Yeah, and again, another really good answer. I know you say it's not, but there's some good highlights right there, you know?
Yeah.
And linking that to my next question, I'm going to kind of ask this in 2 parts. So I want to ask you just in general to begin with, and then I'll ask you specifically about a Taylor Swift song. But yep. When you first get a gig or a session with a new artist, or maybe an artist that you've worked with before, but it's new material, how do you learn the songs? Or I suppose we could even go on to talk about how do you kind of figure out what you're going to play if there's nothing to learn as such?
That's a good question, and it's something that I feel like needs to be spoken about more, because this is where the true player a lot of times really comes into the picture, you know. It's one thing to be able to go and play a gig, and I'm not sliding anything about that, because doing gigs is its own craft 100%. The craft in this is you don't get any workup time. You don't get the songs in advance. You get to the session and you hear the song in an acoustic format. Sometimes the artist will play it in the room and sing along with just an acoustic. Sometimes they've recorded it. Sometimes they'll add in some bits and pieces of ideas that they have, a loop or a whatever as well in the recording that you're hearing. But a lot of the time, it's an acoustic vocal that you're listening to. And you get a chart, which is essentially, you know, a Nashville number chart. It essentially is a skeleton of the song. You can see the form, you can see where it's going. And you can, even before you hear the song, you can kind of see, like, okay, so it does this thing, and the second chorus is going to go into a solo, which hits the bridge, and then, you know, whatever it is. And then as you're listening to the song and you're looking at the chart and you're kind of designing your journey through this piece of music and what you're going to do. Obviously, a lot of your first thoughts are exactly that. They're just the first thoughts as you're listening, the first thing that comes to mind. Sometimes that's the thing, but sometimes as soon as you sit down and start playing, it can go a completely different direction, because all of a sudden now you're hearing the other guys playing, what they've come up with, they're listening to what you came up with. There are plenty of times where I listen to a song and it could go a number of ways, and occasionally they'll want to talk about it, but a lot of times with players, they almost don't want to talk about it, because you'd rather just see what comes out when you sit down. A lot of times when the artist wants to get too specific before we even sat behind our instruments, it's like, let's just see where it goes. and then you can direct us to where you want to go, because you don't always know. Sometimes the players come up with a new thing that the artist never thought of, or the producer never thought of. It's like, oh, I love where this is going. Can we change this in the bridge or whatever? So a lot of times I can't say you have to think about this in order to come up with the part, but I can say that the way that it's sung, what the vocal is doing, I mean, that's what I'm playing to. 90% of the song, I'm playing to what the vocal is doing. If it's busy, I've got to not be so busy, and then think about maybe hitting little bits and pieces, accents or whatnot, you know? It's how you make it move, you know, how you can make it move and have a starting point and an ending point. You obviously aren't going to be huge on the first chorus, and the first chorus isn't going to be your loudest point of the song. I can almost guarantee you that, you know? So there's a lot of, it's where the musicality of a player really comes in. I think these days with Pro Tools, musicality can kind of take a back seat because you can always cut and paste stuff around. But the reality is a player's musicality when it comes to playing a song, that's where it comes in. How do you come up with these parts, you know? And what are you listening to? Yeah.
And would you get, so you said about the artist like recording a vocal and maybe an acoustic guitar or playing that, would that be recorded as like a guide track for you so that you can hear the vocal as you're recording your parts to kind of play around?
A lot of times the artist will be there, so they'll have it as the acoustic vocal will just be sort of the example, like, and then sometimes they won't even have an intro on it. It'll just start on the first verse and they'll say, okay, we need to come up with an intro for this, and like a hook line, which is either like guitar or keys or something, you know, for the intro, and comes back around after the first chorus or whatever. And yeah, the artist will sing when we go to play it. The artist will sing live a lot of times. There will normally be an acoustic and an electric guitar player, so you know there's that. And we literally sit down, having a tempo and a number chart, and having heard the song and thought about what we're going to do. You hear the click, count it off, go. Are you in big? Does it start small? Unless it's been talked about, it's a guess. And sometimes it's like, sometimes you get it wrong. Like, man, loved it. Kind of want to start small and let's make the first chorus the big thing. Or maybe I don't even come into the second verse and there's a loop that carries it. Or, you know, there are those things. But for the most part, honestly, the incredible thing about this town is most of the time, that first take could be on the radio. Whether it's exactly what the producer wanted or not, there could be questions about tempo or form or something like that. But if you put that aside and just mix that first take and not make no edits to it whatsoever, you could put it on the radio and most everybody would not know the difference. The bands here are that good and that intuitive and that quick to respond to what's going on around them. You know, I've been doing this for a long time now, and I still love it. It's still very impressive to me that we could go in and be like, yeah, look at us, we just killed that and didn't even have to think about it, you know. So yeah, it's cool.
And talking about a specific song, I mean, I love your playing on Love Story by Taylor Swift. Okay. And just like, you know, the little things you put in, it's just absolutely lovely. Those things, I mean, I know it was a while ago you recorded that, but, you know, is that like a one take thing, or are those things being added as you play it several times? How are you coming up with those bits and
yeah,
how are they being laid down?
Well, it's interesting with Taylor. Like, we almost had to, I remember with a lot of her recordings, we would almost have to like slow ourselves down because we would get those tracks so quickly. And I think that says something about the songwriting too, because the songs were just so good that right off the bat, a lot of times I would like, I know exactly what I'm going to play on the song. And I almost couldn't wait to get down behind the drums to play it. Yeah. And then honestly, some of those, and I can't remember which ones, but I know at least some of those tracks were first takes. Like Nathan would say, great. I mean, that was awesome. There's nothing more needs to be said about that, you know, and that's it. I don't remember on Love Story, but I could almost guarantee you that I don't think there was a take that was any more than, or a track that was any more than 4 takes, you know? So, you know, those parts, the little bits and pieces that come out, little ghosty things or little accenty things, a lot of that stuff is I can't, it's like trying to explain why I would use the words I'm using right now instead of some other words in the sentence. You know, like
vocabulary.
I don't really know why. It's just it's the words that I'm using, and there it is. And playing is very much the same way. A lot of it is, it's a continual conversation that's going on through the song, and it's kind of neat because there were so few players on it on that particular in those sessions. It was essentially me, bass, acoustic, and or piano. You know, there was hardly ever electric recorded while we were playing it, and then of course Taylor singing. So the little bits and pieces come from me hearing little corners of stuff, like as I'm playing, Taylor singing something and I accent it, and that becomes a thing in the song. I didn't do it to make it a thing in the song. I did it to sort of accent her vocal right there. And then one of the cooler things that I saw that happened here and there was I'd see some live shows of hers, and the things that we did in the studio, like little accents that I did, became moments in songs in her show, you know? And I'm like, it's neat to think that this little trigger that happened in my brain when I heard her sing this or the acoustic do something or whatever became a moment out of thin air. It was just a thing that I did, and it became a thing. Like it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So yeah, I wish I could be a little more in depth on what the process is, but it is literally an of the moment thing, you know?
Yeah, it's your drumming vocabulary coming out and being recorded. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
As you say, like talking. And actually, I've been asked this before, and I think it's quite a relevant thing to ask you. So once you've tracked something and it's like, yep, that's it, brilliant. If you had to then learn that song, how you tracked it, you would probably be like, I actually don't know what I played. I'd have to sit down and like listen to what I played. Is that the case?
There's definitely that. I've definitely I've done gigs with certain artists that I did their record as well, and those are the hardest gigs to prepare for because I want to try and get it as close. Like if somebody else played on the record and that artist asked me to do a gig, I'm just getting the vibe of the song and I'm going to do my thing on it. I'm certainly not going to be playing Phil for Phil unless it's a signature thing. But when it's something that I've played on, and I'm now, let's say it's a year after the session and I'm doing a gig with this artist and I'm charting out these tunes and I'm hearing all the little bits and pieces that I've done, I want to try and incorporate all of those. So, I mean, my charts end up looking like the damn black page because I'm trying to write out all the little things. It's ridiculous because if I just did what I did on every song, half that stuff would probably come out again because it's the same influence. You know, I'm the same person. But yeah, it's the hardest to do is recreate parts that I've created to begin with, you know.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to that because that's something people talk about quite a lot, and so coming from you, that's good to hear.
Well, you know, I mean, the thing is that, like I said, when I'm creating those things, it's being created because of what's happening in the moment. To recreate, you can't recreate that. Whatever the vibe, whatever mood I was in, whatever, you know. I gotta tell you, on part of that Fearless record, you know, we did them in chunks of sessions. So one of those was like a 3-day session at Blackbird, and I had a fever. I was sick. But I'm not going to miss a Taylor. I mean, I'm not going to try and miss any session because there's a lot of money that goes into a session, right? But I'm certainly not that when I knew what it was going to be. I most definitely had a fever, and we were hitting some of those songs, like those big, heavy, rockin' songs. My head just, you know, and between takes I would just go to the lounge area in the studio and just lie on the couch with like hot tea and just try and like get myself ready for the next thing or whatever. But yes, I mean, who knows what my vibe, where I got the things from, but you know, it all worked out to be pretty great. So yeah,
good stuff. So a couple of curveball questions here for you. So right. What are your hobbies away from drums?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, you know, drums are kind of like, we're fortunate that we get to sort of have our hobby and fun as work, sort of is the same thing. But I love cars. I don't get to do as much with cars at the moment, but I always enjoy. I always drive something that I really enjoy, and so there's always going to be a car thing in my life. And at some point, once there's plenty of seven figures in the bank, there'll be more and more of that. Other hobbies. Photography, in a small degree. I have an older but nice camera, and I like going out, and that's a thing. I don't think it's ever going to be a thing. It's funny, once you do something that you love for a living, it's so much focus is on that I don't often find that I care enough about a lot of other things, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that earlier, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. Something I've said to so many people in these interviews, that we as drummers are really fortunate that our hobby becomes our living in one way or another. So
yeah,
it's
it is super fortunate. And obviously, we get told it our whole lives. When people ask me, particularly years ago, they're like, well, what do you do? And it's like, well, I'm a drummer. And like, oh yes, and what else do you do? Like, is that like, no, that's what I do. That's what I do for a living. They're like, wow, that must be so cool to love what you do for a living. And honestly, I'm like, well, yeah, it is. I would never have thought of any other thing. Like, I get that sometimes, I mean, you design the life you lead, and that is what it is. We are fortunate. We are fortunate to have been able to get here, and I appreciate it. And yet there wasn't an option B ever. This was it, So yeah.
You could have worked with cars. I mean,
No, okay. Actually, that would have been the option B. If I had grown up in the States, like if I wasn't, we moved, like I said, right about the time I was 13. If I had been here as a little kid, I potentially would have gotten into go-karts, and who knows, but that would have been an option for sure.
That was when I was younger. I probably started when I was about 12. I did karting on a national level in the UK.
Oh, wow.
And then I found drums, and I hope my dad doesn't watch this. Because he was paying for all the karting. He got to a point, and he was like, "Look, you can't do both of these things. There's not time in your life. Which one are you going to do?" And I was like, "Drums."
Yeah. Well, you see, and that's the thing. I mean, I say, like, if I was younger and gotten into karting, but who knows? Drums might have still come in and just swept it all away, and it'd be exactly in the same place,
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good job I did choose that, because I used to do karting with Lewis Hamilton.
Wow.
Look where he is now. There's no way that I would have had the success that he had. Whereas with drums, at least I've made a career out of it for 16 years. So...
That's pretty cool, man. Imagine if you and Lewis Hamilton had come out of the same place.
He still owes me a beef burger.
There you go.
And my other curveball question is, what's your favourite cookie?
My favorite what?
Cookie or biscuit? I don't know.
Oh,
I mean,
cookie, like a cookie. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Wow, that is curveball. I would go with I would probably go with as far as cookies go, like a soft chocolate chip cookie, like a straight out of the oven, soft chocolate chip cookie dipped in milk. That would probably be my option.
So you've already answered the next part of the question is, would you dunk it? So there you are, right?
I'm from South Africa. My family comes from the English heritage side, so dunking was introduced at a very young age. I dunk anything I can dunk. I'm gonna dunk.
Cool. And my last serious question now, although people want to know about cookies and
cookies are serious. Yeah.
Exactly. But my last serious question: if you could give just one bit of advice to up and coming drummers, people that want to make drums more either a career or just a big part of their life, what would that one bit of advice be?
We live in a much different world now than we did when I was growing up playing drums, and it's not unusual at all to have a setup like I have for recording here, like a fully mic'd up kit, as the regular. I mean, a lot of kids now with kits have it all mic'd up and they have it run through whatever, and they're posting YouTube videos, GoPros everywhere and whatnot, and that's awesome. I would say, and a lot of times they're playing along with their favorite artist track, whatever it is. I gotta say, just quick other side note, one of the other great highlights in my career was getting to see kids play along with tracks that I played on, because it hit home, because that's exactly what I used to do. That's how I learned how to play drums, was except in a way less technical setting. I had a Discman and a tape recorder and a mixer, and like I said before, in the apartment I was in, I had electronic drums because that's what I had. So it's not like they were mic'd up; they were just running stereo out of the brain into this little mixer from Radio Shack, and I would record myself playing on whatever I was playing on that day. I mean, I would come home from school and sit behind those drums for 2 or 3 hours at a time, playing along with whatever CDs I was playing along with, right? And I would record them, and then I would go to bed that night listening to what I played on top of, the electronic drums on top of the track that I was playing on, trying to mimic the track that was on there, whatever the drummer was doing, as close as I could, or however close that was. That's how I learned how to play drums. I think a lot of people today, I think they just try and play as much as they can on top of stuff. I would just say one of the things for young people learning how to play, don't be afraid to copy the tracks that you love. It could be harmful to copy one particular drummer across the board. I mean, obviously listen to different stuff, but try and figure out exactly what that person did on the track. And nowadays there's ways to be able to do that. And like I said, most people, whether they have acoustic kits or not, they have them mic'd up and they can record them. So record yourself over the track that you're listening to. Import it into Pro Tools or whatever program you're using, and then record the drums over them and see how close you can get, both in the pocket and with the fills, all the stuff. Really memorize that track and get all the pieces down. And you don't have to work on memorizing it, just play it because you love playing and that's the music you love. I just think it's more important than people give it credit for. And I've been told, like when I was at Berkeley, a professor told me, like, you don't want to copy something because then you don't develop your own style. And I, in class, was like, disagreed with him. I was like, I completely think that you gain your own style by copying lots of people. I mean, that's where we learn from,
And it all adds to, going back to your drumming vocabulary. And going
That's
back to name one favorite drummer, I said I couldn't do that, and obviously nor can you really, because there's so many influences that make us who we are.
Completely.
We copy those influences. So I'm totally with you.
And when you listen to music, especially if you want to make drumming more of your life as opposed to just a hobby to play. I mean, playing along with stuff, I mean, that's great too. If you want to actually play with artists, you're going to need different corners of varying players' drumming personalities in your playing. I hear something and I think this is a Steve Jordan-y kind of vibe. I'll sort of fit in. It's never going to sound like Steve Jordan because it's still me, but that's where my head's at, So I think that's the advice I would give is don't be afraid to copy other drummers as long as you have your own voice. Work on your own voice. Use the tools that everybody else is giving you to develop your own sound. But I think playing along with stuff is key.
So, Nick, thank you so much for spending your time with us at DrumWise today. It's been great talking to you. All the best, and stay safe out there.
Hey, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. You're a very good interviewer. It's very fun talking.